The envelope was already open when Vivienne— "No. Let me check the names file properly first." The contract sat on the table between them like a verdict nobody had asked for. Sable Whitmore, 37 years old, co-founder and silent majority shareholder of Arrowwood Interiors, one of the fastest-growing luxury home design firms on the East Coast, stood in the middle of her own living room holding a wine glass she hadn't touched, watching her husband's father point at a magazine spread and tell a room full of people that Arrowwood was the company his son deserved to partner with. Her husband, Crispin Whitmore, 41, sat beside his father and smiled like a man who had just won something. He had no idea. That morning, Sable had received the execute term sheet. Arrowwood's legal team had finalized a minority acquisition agreement with Whitmore Capital Group, Crispin's family firm. After 8 months of anonymous negotiation conducted entirely through her attorney, Arrowwood's identity as the counterparty had been masked behind a holding company, as it always was in early-stage dealings. The reveal was scheduled for the formal signing gala in 3 weeks. Sable had planned to tell Crispin herself quietly before then. She had not anticipated that his father, Aldous Whitmore, 69, Chairman Emeritus of Whitmore Capital, would pick up a copy of Architectural Digest at his club, find the Arrowwood feature inside, and decide to make it a talking point at the dinner party she had organized in their own home. She had not anticipated standing here, in the house she partially paid for, listening to Aldous say, loud enough for 12 guests to hear, that Arrowwood was exactly the kind of company real men built. Not the decorating hobby nonsense women started to keep themselves busy. The woman he was talking about was his daughter-in-law. He just didn't know it yet. People who met Sable Whitmore at Crispin's family events would have described her the same way. Quiet, pleasant, not particularly ambitious. She dressed well but not memorably. She asked polite questions and offered few opinions. She laughed at the right moments and excused herself early. This was not who she was. It was who she had decided to be in rooms where being herself created friction. Sable had started Arrowwood 11 years ago with her college roommate Petra. No, Petra was on the list. Her business partner's name was Juno Rask, 38, who handled client relations and new markets while Sable ran design operations and held the majority stake. They had built the firm from a 2-person studio in Richmond, Virginia, into a nationally recognized name with offices in 4 cities and a client waitlist that ran 18 months long. Crispin knew she worked in interior design. He knew she had a business. He had attended exactly 1 industry event with her in 6 years of marriage, spent the evening on his phone, and left before the keynote. He called it her little firm when he was being affectionate, and the decorating thing when he was not. His father called it a hobby. His mother, Marguerite Whitmore, 66, had once suggested at Easter that Apple to consider winding it down now that Crispin was doing so well. "You don't need to keep proving yourself, sweetheart," she had said, in the tone of a woman who had never proven herself to anyone and considered that an achievement. Sable had smiled and passed the roles. She had learned very early in this marriage that correcting the Whitmore family's assumptions about her was like correcting the weather. It didn't help. It just made you wet and irritated. So she stopped. She let them believe what they wanted. She went home, opened her laptop, and built the thing they would eventually need to beg her for access to. She hadn't planned it as revenge. That part just worked out. The dinner party was a Thursday in late October. Sable had arranged it herself. 12 guests, catered, a mix of Crispin's colleagues and 2 couples they both liked. The evening was supposed to be easy. She had been looking forward to easy. Aldous arrived 40 minutes early, which he always did, and installed himself in the living room armchair with a scotch before anyone else had been seated. He had brought the magazine. He produced it at the table during the second course, which was a thing Aldous did. He treated dinner parties as press conferences he hadn't been invited to chair and corrected by showing up early and bringing materials. "Arrowwood," he said, laying the spread open beside his plate. "You know this firm?" He was asking Crispin's colleague across the table, a man named Bart Fennick who worked in commercial real estate. Bart nodded. "Good reputation. Very selective clientele. Whitmore Capital is in final stages with them," Aldous said. "I pushed for it myself." "Crispin, tell them." Crispin, who had been in those meetings as the junior partner managing the deal, not as the architect of it, straightened slightly. "It's a strong acquisition target. We see significant upside in the luxury residential market. Real business," Aldous said, with the satisfaction of a man landing a plane he'd been co-piloting for 30 years. "That's what I keep telling people. Luxury is recession-resistant. You want to know where old money goes? It goes to make itself comfortable. Arrowwood knows how to make people comfortable. They've built something serious." He paused and glanced towards Sable with the expression he wore when he was about to be magnanimous. "Not like the little boutique things. No offense, Sable. Your work is lovely. This is just a different scale." Sable looked at him. She took a sip of her wine. She set the glass down.
None taken, she said.
That night, after the guests had left and Crispin was loading the dishwasher with his jacket still on because he never took his jacket off before he started doing something, Sable sat at the kitchen island and thought about the 3 weeks between now and the gala. She could still tell it. Even, she could say, "Yeah, Crispin, sit down, I need to tell you something about the Arrowwood deal." She had rehearsed a version of this conversation several times. It was always calm in the rehearsal. Crispin nodded, processed, eventually understood. The actual Crispin was harder to predict. He was not a bad man in the way that phrase usually means. He did not lie, did not cheat, did not disappear. He was faithful and reliable and present in the physical sense of the word. He was also a person who had grown up being told he was exceptional and had developed over 4 decades a complete inability to hold the idea that someone near him might be more capable than he was. Not consciously, just structurally. It was built into how he saw the world. When Sable mentioned a problem at work, Crispin offered solutions. When she mentioned a success, he listened for about 45 seconds and then connected it to something he had done. When she had landed the Harwick Estate Commission, her firm's biggest at the time, he had said, "That's great, babe," and then spent the rest of dinner talking about a pitch he had given that week. She had told herself this was fine. A lot of marriages ran on parallel tracks. You didn't need your spouse to witness everything. You had friends for that. But sitting at the kitchen island on a Thursday night, listening to his father call her life's work a boutique thing, while her husband smiled and said nothing, she felt something shift. Not break. Just settle into a new position, the way a house shifts in winter. She went to bed. She did not tell him. The following Monday, Sable met with Juno at their Richmond office to walk through the gala logistics. The event was being held at the Caldwell, a restored historic hotel in downtown Richmond, and Arrowwood was hosting, which meant Sable had personally approved everything from the centerpieces to the place card font. "Walk me through the reveal sequence again," Juno said, coffee in hand, feet on the conference table. Welcome remarks, then the Arrowwood overview presentation, then the formal introduction of the acquisition partner, which is when we display the Whitmore Capital slide and I step out of the audience. Juno looked at her over the rim of her mug. "Does Crispin know?" "Not yet." "I know, the man is going to walk into a room thinking he's there as a minor deal manager and find out his wife is the majority shareholder of the company his family just spent 8 months trying to buy. I'm aware of the optics. That's not optics. That's a whole situation." Sable looked out the window at the street below. "I've been trying the right moment for 6 months. There wasn't one." Juno was quiet for a moment. "Is that really why?" Sable didn't answer immediately. She turned her coffee cup around in her hands. "When we started this firm," she said finally, "Crispin's father told him at Christmas that I was playing at business. I was 26. I had just signed our first commercial lease." Crispin laughed. I don't think he meant anything by it, but he laughed. Juno nodded slowly. "I'm not doing this to humiliate anyone," Sable said. "I was going to tell him. I want to stand in that room and be seen for what I actually built, without the context of being Crispin Whitmore's wife first. Just once." Juno set her mug down. "Okay," she said, "then we make it count." She did tell him, 4 days before the gala. Not because she had fully resolved her feelings about it, because her attorney, a careful woman named Dex Farrow, had called to say that as majority shareholder, Sable needed to be present at the signing as Arrowwood's identified principal, and that Whitmore Capital's team would receive the counterparty disclosure document no later than Wednesday, which meant Crispin would find out through paperwork if she didn't tell him first. She chose first. She waited until Sunday evening. They were in the kitchen again. It was always the kitchen. She didn't know why. Maybe because the kitchen was where you went when something needed to get done. She made tea she didn't drink and asked him to sit down. He sat. She told him. She told him she had co-founded Arrowwood 11 years ago, that she held 54% of the firm, that the Whitmore Capital deal was the culmination of a process she had overseen since the early stages, and that in 4 days they would both be at the Caldwell for the signing gala, where this would become a matter of public record. Crispin did not say anything for a long time. "You're telling me," he said finally, "that you own Arrowwood. Majority shareholder, yes, the Arrowwood that my father—" "Yes." He put both hands flat on the table. She watched him work through it. His jaw moved, his eyes went somewhere she couldn't see. "For how long?" he asked. "The firm has been operating for 11 years. We've been married for 6, so you never told me. I didn't hide it from you deliberately at first. It just became something I kept in its own space. And then time passed. Time passed." He repeated it slowly, like a man tasting something he hadn't ordered. "Crispin, I sat at that dinner party," he said, "and my father talked about your company for 20 minutes and I nodded along like..." He stopped. I had no idea. My own wife. I know. Do you know how that feels? She looked at him steadily. I know how it feels to have your husband sit at a dinner party while his father calls your work a boutique thing and not say a word. He went quiet. That wasn't. He stopped again. I didn't know. You didn't ask. The silence between them was the kind that had weight. Not hostile exactly, just full, like a room where too many things had accumulated and nobody had touched them in years. I need to think, he said. Okay. He got up from the table and went upstairs. She sat alone in the kitchen with the tea going cold and thought about the fact that she felt, underneath everything else, almost relieved. The thing that had been living in the wall of her marriage had finally made a sound. She didn't see much of Crispin over the next 4 days. He went to the office early and came home late and spoke to her in the careful way people speak when they are managing their own reactions. She gave him the space. She had her own things to manage. Juno called twice a day. The gala team sent 17 emails. Her attorney sent 4. Her mother called once, which was more than usual, and Sable answered it standing in the parking garage of the Richmond office and told her everything. And her mother said, "Oh, Sable," in the voice that meant she had suspected as much for a while. The morning of the gala, Crispin came downstairs while she was at the kitchen island with her laptop open to the final program. He poured himself coffee and stood at the counter. "I'll be there," he said. She looked up. "Tonight, I'll be there." He held the mug in both hands. "I'm not. I'm still processing this. But I'll be there." She nodded. "Thank you." He looked at her for a moment. "Was it always this big? The company? It's been this size for about 4 years." He nodded slowly. "Okay." He didn't say anything else. He took his coffee into the other room. She closed the laptop. She breathed. The Caldwell was the kind of place that made people feel like they had arrived somewhere, even if they couldn't name exactly where. High ceilings, restored walnut floors, the kind of lighting that made everyone look like a better version of themselves. Arrowood had designed the renovation 3 years ago. Sable's fingerprints were on every room. She arrived at 5:30 to oversee setup in a deep bronze dress that her assistant had helped her select 3 weeks ago specifically for this moment. Not the kind of dress that said, "Look at me," but the kind that said, "I knew where I was going when I got dressed this morning." Juno found her near the registration table at 6. "You look like a CEO," she said. "I am a CEO. You look like one who knows it tonight." Juno squeezed her arm. "How are you?" "Settled," Sable said, and she was. Surprisingly, the nerves she had expected weren't there. What was there instead was something quieter, a kind of clarity that came from a long time of carrying something and finally being allowed to put it down. Guests arrived at 6:30. Crispin came with his colleague Bart Fennick, which she had not known to expect and found oddly poignant. Bart, who had nodded at the magazine spread at the dinner party 2 weeks ago. They both greeted her near the entrance. Bart said she looked wonderful. Crispin touched her elbow briefly and said nothing. Aldous arrived at 6:45 without Marguerite, who had sent her regrets due to a prior engagement. He was wearing the grey suit he wore to things he considered important. He shook hands around the room with the efficiency of a man who treated every social event as a networking function he was running. He did not yet understand what he had walked into. The program began at 7. Juno welcomed the room, introduced the Arrowood overview. 12 years of work condensed into 8 minutes of imagery and numbers that made several people in the audience visibly recalibrate their understanding of what they were looking at. Revenue figures, a client list, project scope, the Harwick estate, the Meridian Tower residential floors, the historic preservation work in Savannah that had made the cover of a national journal last spring. Sable watched from her seat near the back. She watched Crispin's face as the slides changed. She watched Aldous sit straighter. Then Juno said, "We are proud to announce the formal partnership between Arrowood Interiors and Whitmore Capital Group, a milestone that marks the beginning of our next chapter." A pause. "And we are honored to introduce Arrowood's founder and majority shareholder, who has led this firm since its founding and will continue to guide its direction as we move into this partnership." Juno looked toward the back of the room. "Please welcome Sable Whitmore." There was a half-second where the room did not know how to arrange itself. Then it understood. Then it began to applaud. Sable walked to the front. She did not look at Aldous first. She looked at the room, at the people who had worked with her, contracted with her, trusted her, with the spaces where they lived and gathered and raised their children. She looked at Juno, who was grinning. Then she looked at Aldous Whitmore, 69, chairman emeritus of Whitmore Capital, the man who had called her work a boutique thing in her own home. He had gone very still. Crispin had his hand over his mouth. Bart Fennick looked like a man doing rapid arithmetic. She stepped to the podium. She thanked the room. She spoke about the firm, about Juno, about the team in 4 cities who had made this possible. She spoke about what it meant to build something over a long stretch of time. The way you sometimes couldn't see the shape of it while you were inside it. The way the view only opened up when you finally stood at the right distance. She did not look at Aldous again. She didn't need to. After the formal portion, the room moved into cocktail hour. People Sable had known professionally for a decade came to congratulate her. Her attorney stood nearby and accepted handshakes on the firm's behalf. Juno appeared at her elbow every 20 minutes like a lighthouse. Aldous found her near the bar at 8:15. He was a man who had spent 69 years walking into rooms expecting them to rearrange for him. She watched him work through what rearranging was now required. "Sable," he said. "Aldous." He looked at her for a moment. "Why didn't you say something? At the dinner, or before?" She considered this. "When would have been the right time, Aldous? Before you called my work a boutique thing or after?" His jaw tightened. "I didn't know. I know you didn't." She held her champagne glass at her side. "That's what I've been thinking about. You spent 6 years forming opinions about what I do without asking a single question about it. Not once, and Crispin didn't either." She paused. No one asked. He was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his face. Not quite embarrassment, not quite recognition. Something in between. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. It sounded like a man reading from a card he had written quickly, but it sounded genuine underneath that. "You do," she said, "and I'll accept it. But I want you to understand something. I'm not standing here as Crispin's wife tonight. I'm standing here as the person who built this company. Those are both true things. I've been waiting a long time to be in a room where both were true at the same time." She excused herself. Crispin found her on the terrace at 9, after most of the guests had moved inside. The October air was clean and cold. The city below them glittered in the way cities do when you're above them. He stood beside her at the railing for a while without speaking. "I watched the presentation," he said finally. "I know, those numbers. The Meridian Project. The Savannah work." He stopped. "I've never seen any of that. You didn't ask. You could have told me." She turned to look at him. "I tried to tell you about work, Crispin, for 6 years. You'd listen for a minute and then talk about your own week. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it was true and it hurt. And after a while I stopped trying and just kept those parts of myself somewhere you weren't." He absorbed this. She watched him do it. He was a good-looking man, Crispin, in the way of men who had always been looked at, kindly, and knew it. Tonight he looked smaller than usual, not diminished, just actual-sized. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't know if that covers it. It doesn't, but it's a start." "What do you want?" he asked. "From me. What do you actually want?" She thought about this for a real moment, not the rehearsed answer, the actual one. "I want a husband who asks," she said, "not who is impressed by what I've done, necessarily. Just someone who wants to know. Someone who makes space for the fact that I have a whole world that doesn't involve him and is curious about it instead of indifferent." He nodded slowly. "Can you be that person?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. She respected that. A quick yes would have been the wrong thing. "I don't know," he said. "I think so. I want to try." "That's honest," she said. They stood in the cold air for another few minutes, the city below them doing what cities do, indifferent and bright. "Your father called it a boutique thing," she said, "in our living room, with guests at the table. I know. I heard him." "You didn't say anything." He was quiet. "I didn't know what I was defending." "You should have asked," she said. "That's all. You should have asked." The signing happened the next morning in a conference room at Arrowwood's Richmond office. Crispin was not present. It was not his meeting to attend. Aldous was, as the firm's chairman. He arrived precisely on time, accepted coffee when it was offered, and sat across the table from Sable and Dex Farrow with the carefully arranged expression of a man who had recalibrated overnight. When the documents were placed in front of him, he looked at the signature line above Sable's name. Sable Whitmore, founder and majority shareholder, Arrowwood Interiors LLC. He picked up the pen. "You built something serious," he said. His voice was quieter than his dinner party voice. "I was wrong about what you were doing." Sable looked at the page. "Yes, you were," he signed. She signed. Dex Farrow collected the documents and said she would have executed copies to both parties by end of day. Aldous stood. He extended his hand. She shook it. "I hope," he said, "that you'll give this partnership a real chance, not just the business. The other part." She looked at him. "I intend to give everything a real chance," she said. "That's who I am. I just need people to see who I am first." He nodded. Something in his face had shifted in a way that looked permanent. She walked him to the elevator. She watched the doors close. Then she went back to the conference room, where Juno was already pouring champagne into paper cups because they hadn't thought to bring real glasses, and they stood there in the middle of the firm they had built together and drank out of paper cups and didn't say much for a while. They didn't need to. The work had said it. The work had always said it. It just finally had the room to be heard.